Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and earlier today it was my pleasure to interview Nick Bryant for almost an hour on the subject of Jeffrey Epstein. For those unfamiliar with Nick Bryant's work with the Epstein case and perhaps familiar with the Franklin scandal and his work there, you should also note that Nick Bryant is the journalist that got the black book that was put out there by the Butler, okay, into the mainstream media via Gawker. That and so much more is discussed in the full interview over at Rumble, Rockfin, and Podbean. Unfortunately, with all the restrictions on YouTube and the fact that I have 2 strikes, we couldn't do more. But here is a 10-plus minute excerpt where Nick Bryant actually discusses the possibility of Epstein clones and Alexander Acosta via the intelligence link, and so much more. We get into so much in the uncensored portion, but please enjoy this sample. You talked about Les Wexner. You talked about how he's basically been exonerated by the media. We have 2 other people that weren't exonerated by the media. Jean-Luc Brunel, who happened to be in the book, also circled. We have photographic evidence of him on, well, more than photographic evidence, but photographic evidence that was used in the Maxwell trial with him, Maxwell, and Epstein, another person involved in the fashion industry, much like Wexner. And then you also have currently Peter Nygard, who was in the fashion industry as well. Had his own island. We'll get into Zorro Ranch in a moment, and he's in Toronto. They just added 2 more charges to him. Brunel, of course, in February allegedly hung himself in Spain, I believe. His lawyers come out and said that there were numerous suicide attempts before that. And I would just say this, without any evidence, I know that everybody talks about being suicided. You could put somebody like Jean-Luc Brunel in a situation where maybe something was happening to him every single day, beatings, sodomy, rape, where he might want to take his life. I don't know for sure, but they certainly didn't want him to stand trial, in my opinion. So what are your thoughts about this network? Number one, being involved in modeling obviously gives you access to beautiful women and young girls who want to be in the modeling industry. Claude Hadid and others in the 80s were running these multiple apartments of 14-year-olds, for instance. Do you think that these people are involved at a higher level? You know, because people like Nygard into eugenics, stem cell treatment, immortality. Epstein had the quote-unquote baby-making ranch in New Mexico. What are the connections between fashion, models, and kind of this abuse scenario?
And then Epstein was also into transhumanism.
Yes.
I'm sure he's cloned himself. He was a megalomaniac. So, and cloning is relatively easy these days. So there's probably some Jeffrey Epsteins. Instead of the boys from Brazil, it's going to be the boys from Coney Island.
And hold on, let me stop you because I don't want my audience to get too excited. Nick Bryant says clones of Epstein everywhere. When you talk about that, a lot of people now are talking about, doubles and clones. You're not talking about a gestated 60-something-year-old Epstein clone. You're talking about taking his genetics and then basically cloning them to have a baby that would be born with the same genetics as Jeffrey Epstein, correct?
Yes.
Exactly. All right, continue.
And actually, it's quite easy to do. I mean, take the DNA out of an egg, you deposit the other DNA into the egg, and either through chemical or electricity, you can start the mitosis process. So, I mean, we've been cloning mammals for years. We cloned Dolly the sheep 25 years ago or 24 years ago. So we're very advanced with cloning. But anyway, cloning aside, this went all the way up. There's a very dark, malignant corner of our intelligence. And I wrote about it in the Franklin scandal. I wrote about it in Confessions of a DC Madam. And I've got a book coming out in August where I write about it again. But there's a very dark, malignant corner of our intelligence that compromises people, either sexually or, I mean, if you have any illicit habits, you're going to get compromised. And even if you're married and you're a politician, if you're a Republican politician and you're married and you're having affairs, that's the end of your career. If you're gay, except for Barney Frank, that's probably going to be the end of your career too, especially if you're a family values gay guy like Larry Craig or Hastert, the Speaker of the House. So these guys that are in this very dark corner of our intelligence have been doing this for a very long time. And they compromise people. They'll compromise people with children. They'll compromise people with young women in their 20s that are beautiful. They'll compromise people with young men, good-looking young men in their 20s. Whatever you want or whatever they think will elicit a response from you will be dangled in front of you. With the Franklin scandal, what happened there was there would be parties. Craig Spence, Lawrence C. King and Craig Spence ran this pedophile network, and Craig Spence had a nice home in Washington, D.C. Well, actually, it was larger than a home in Washington, D.C. that was wired for audiovisual blackmail with pinhole cameras, much like Epstein's place in Florida, his place in New York, and also the island. So what would happen is Spence would invite a lot of power brokers to his parties, and it would start out as a regular political party, a Washington, D.C. party. And then after the guests had been plied with alcohol for a number of hours, something sexually inappropriate would happen, or someone would break out a line of cocaine, something like that would happen. And people that wanted no part of that would split. But then the people that stuck around, and they'd been plied with alcohol, so they were malleable. The people that stuck around, they were compromised. And that King and Spence worked for that dark, malignant corner of intelligence, and so did Epstein. And there's a really interesting anecdote about Epstein. Brad Edwards was going to be on my podcast next week. It's a really good interview. Mm-hmm. Talked to Epstein's bodyguard. Epstein had this heavy-duty bodyguard. And Epstein had his bodyguard go to the CIA and attend a class for a week. And then he was given like a pamphlet about the class that he attended. And there was someone in the CIA put a letter in there and told the bodyguard to give it to Epstein. So that's just additional evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was in cahoots with the CIA. And then we have that quote by Alexander Acosta when he was being vetted for Trump's administration for labor secretary. He was asked, well, why didn't you go after Epstein? And he said, well, I was told that Epstein was intelligence and to back off. And how many people can tell a U.S. attorney to back off? The order has to come from on high. I mean, it's either the president or the attorney general.
Let me follow up on that really quickly, because when that, again, came into light, it was published by Vicky Ward. I believe it was in Vanity Fair. Zero Hedge picked it up. Within days, Acosta had held a press conference, and he was asked that very question about intelligence, and he spoke around it. He said He was aware of the report, but don't believe everything that you read. So, again, he didn't say yes or no. I believe it was within 48 hours of him being asked that question that he was stepping down as the labor secretary on camera with Donald Trump.
Yeah, it was a tough ride for Alexander Acosta. He had to cover up this huge pedophile network, and then he had to step down for being labor secretary. You know what we need? We really need people to do their jobs. We needed Alexander Acosta to do his job. The feds were aware of 34, 35, 36 victims. I've got it, all the victims that they were aware of. And no one got indicted for molesting any of those underage girls. It's really sad that people can't do their jobs, or aren't willing to do their jobs, or they're ethical eunuchs, and they just want to go to the next plane of power. And Alexander Acosta certainly went to that next plane, but it didn't work out for him that well.
Well, let's talk about planes of power and, people doing their jobs, because we saw, again, the island. We saw the New York establishment be raided, but what we didn't see was anybody investigate Zorro Ranch, again, the alleged baby-making ranch. And once we got those documents via that 2000 document dump, in detail, there were descriptions of Bill Richardson, who was the governor. He had run for president. He was part of the Clinton cabinet, also a council on foreign relations guy. He's never really been named. I don't know of one major media outlet that has named him, that AKA put him in a story on Fox, CNN, MSNBC at all. And they never went to this compound that was one of the most secluded of all. And Lord knows what they would have found there. What are your thoughts on Zorro Ranch and Richardson in particular?
Okay, so the governor of New Mexico after Richardson was Bruce King. And he is circled in the Black Book, as is Bill Richardson. So Epstein had really augured into New Mexico, and he didn't. And Epstein was parading young girls that were 12 or 13 around, and he didn't even have to provide. He didn't even have to register as a sex offender in New Mexico. So basically, he had his run of the state. And if Bill Richardson and Bruce King were in fact compromised, which they seem to have been, and Epstein's working for that malignant corner of intelligence that does compromise people, Epstein's going to do whatever he wants in New Mexico, and it sounds like he did.
So once again, guys, we want to remind you, you can watch the full interview over at Rockfin and at Podbean, as well as Rumble. And if you want to support this broadcast, the links are down below, $5, $10, $15. It means the world to me. Buy me a coffee. That's how we continue to bring you this great information that is not about left or right, and always about right and wrong.